So it seems like Jordan Addison was arrested on Friday for suspicion of drunk driving.
Yeah, and now the body cam footage is out, and it's wild. Jordan Addison looks completely out of it, and the whole thing is going viral. According to him, he's ready for whatever the league decides.
Whatever the league got for me, I'll be prepared with whatever decision they make.
But after watching this footage, fans are questioning whether he even understands how serious this situation really is. Let's get into it. New body cam footage shows Jordan Addison's shocking DUI arrest.
Everybody gonna have some questions about, what happened a few weeks ago. If I was y'all, I would too, but I was told by my attorney and my agent that I couldn't really answer too many questions on it.
The night of July 12, 2024 started like any other summer evening in Los Angeles. Traffic was flowing normally on Interstate 105 near LAX airport when suddenly reports began flooding in about a disabled vehicle blocking traffic in the number 1 lane. What California Highway Patrol officers discovered when they arrived at the scene would become one of the most talked about incidents in recent NFL history. Jordan Addison, the Minnesota Vikings' promising wide receiver, was found completely unconscious behind the wheel of his white Rolls-Royce luxury vehicle. The 22-year-old first-round draft pick wasn't just taking a quick nap. He was passed out cold, his expensive car sitting motionless and creating a dangerous hazard for other drivers trying to navigate around the massive obstruction on one of California's busiest freeways. The responding officers immediately recognized this wasn't a simple mechanical breakdown or someone who had pulled over feeling tired. This was something much more serious. At approximately 11:06 p.m. Pacific time, CHP officers arrived on scene and began their investigation. What they found would lead to Addison's arrest just 30 minutes later at 11:36 p.m. on suspicion of driving under the influence. The timing of this incident couldn't have been worse for the Vikings organization and Addison personally. Just 6 days earlier, on July 6, 2024, Vikings rookie cornerback Kyrie Jackson had been killed in a tragic car crash in Maryland where alcohol was a factor. The other driver in that fatal accident had a blood alcohol content of 0.26%, more than 3 times the legal limit. Jackson, along with 2 of his high school friends, lost their lives in that devastating crash. For Addison, who had played with Jackson at Oregon before transferring to USC, the loss hit particularly hard. He had attended Jackson's funeral and posted emotional tributes on social media, describing himself as being in a dark place emotionally. The fact that he would be found drunk behind the wheel just days after burying a teammate who died because of someone else's drunk driving created a level of outrage that went far beyond typical celebrity DUI arrests. The body cam footage captured the entire encounter between Addison and law enforcement. Officers conducted field sobriety tests, which Addison failed, leading to his formal arrest. The investigation revealed that his blood alcohol content was over California's legal limit of 0.08%, though the exact BAC reading wasn't immediately made public. What made this arrest even more unusual was how it was handled by California's legal system. Rather than being taken to jail for formal booking with a mugshot, Addison was processed under California's cite and release policy for low-level offenses like first-time misdemeanors. This meant he was released to family or friends at 1:36 a.m., just 2 hours after his arrest, without going through the traditional booking process that most people associate with DUI arrests. The news broke the following day, July 13, 2024, and the reaction was immediate and intense. Social media platforms exploded with commentary, criticism, and debate about what had happened. Addison quickly deactivated his Twitter account and removed Vikings-related content from his Instagram, clearly recognizing the severity of the situation and the public relations nightmare that was unfolding. Fan reactions on Twitter were particularly harsh and divided into several distinct camps. The majority expressed outrage over what they saw as incredible insensitivity and poor judgment. Comments like, "asleep at the wheel," "weeks after a teammate dies in a drunk driving accident," "bro," and "impressive stupidity" flooded social media feeds. Many fans couldn't understand how someone with Addison's wealth and resources could make such a reckless decision when safer alternatives like Uber or hiring a private driver were easily accessible. The timing factor amplified every aspect of the criticism. Fans repeatedly pointed out that this wasn't just any DUI arrest. This was a millionaire athlete getting drunk and passing out behind the wheel of a luxury car just days after attending the funeral of a teammate who died because someone else made the exact same selfish decision to drive while intoxicated. Reddit communities, particularly in subreddits like RNFL and R Minnesota Vikings, became battlegrounds for heated discussions about the incident. The overwhelming sentiment was disappointment and frustration. Users shared personal stories about losing loved ones to drunk drivers, with some calling for Addison to be cut from the team entirely. The phrase disgraceful appeared repeatedly throughout these discussions, with many fans arguing that his actions risked innocent lives and showed a complete lack of respect for his deceased teammates' memory. However, not all reactions were purely condemnatory. A smaller but vocal group of fans and commenters attempted to provide some context and perspective. They pointed out that at least Addison had chosen to sleep rather than continue driving while impaired, potentially preventing a more serious accident. Some noted that California's legal system seemed designed to handle first-time offenders with relative leniency, suggesting that the cite and release procedure indicated this wasn't viewed as an extremely serious offense by local authorities. These defenders also highlighted Addison's emotional state following Jackson's death, arguing that grief and trauma can lead people to make poor decisions they wouldn't normally make. They emphasized that he was dealing with the loss of not just a teammate, but someone he had known and played with in college, making the emotional impact even more severe. The Vikings organization found themselves in an incredibly difficult position. On July 15, 2024, the team issued a carefully worded statement acknowledging the arrest and stating they were gathering more information. The statement was notably restrained, avoiding both harsh condemnation and full-throated support, clearly indicating that team officials were still processing the situation and determining their response. Media coverage of the incident was extensive and largely critical. National sports outlets picked up the story immediately, with many emphasizing the connection to Jackson's recent death and questioning the culture within the Vikings organization. Some reports speculated about whether marijuana rather than alcohol might have been involved, though official charges later confirmed it was alcohol-related with a BAC over 0.08%. The incident also sparked broader conversations about athlete accountability and the responsibilities that come with fame and wealth. Many commentators used Addison's case as an example of how young athletes sometimes struggle to handle sudden success and the freedoms that come with multi-million-dollar contracts. The image of a 22-year-old passed out in a Rolls-Royce became a symbol for critics of what they saw as entitled behavior among professional athletes. Fantasy football communities had their own reactions, with many discussing how a potential suspension would affect Addison's draft value for the upcoming season. Some fantasy players began trading him away at reduced prices, anticipating that NFL discipline was inevitable regardless of how the legal case was resolved. The body cam footage and arrest details also highlighted interesting aspects of California's approach to DUI enforcement. The fact that Addison was found asleep at the wheel rather than actively driving created some legal complexities, though officers clearly had enough evidence to determine he had been operating the vehicle while intoxicated. The cite and release procedure drew particular attention from fans in other states, many of whom noted that similar incidents in their home states would likely result in immediate jail time and much harsher treatment. As news of the arrest continued to spread and dominate sports headlines, it became clear that this incident would have far-reaching consequences for Addison's career and reputation. The combination of the tragic timing, the shocking circumstances of being found unconscious in traffic, and the broader context of athlete accountability created a perfect storm of negative publicity that would follow him throughout the legal proceedings that were about to begin. Jordan Addison's DUI legal battle unfolds with surprising twists. The legal machinery began grinding into motion almost immediately after Jordan Addison's arrest, but what followed was a lengthy and complex process that would stretch across nearly an entire year. The case would take several unexpected turns, involve multiple court appearances, and ultimately conclude with a resolution that satisfied neither his harshest critics nor his most devoted supporters. On July 31st, 2024, nearly 3 weeks after his arrest, Addison was formally charged in Los Angeles County Superior Court with 2 separate misdemeanor counts. The charges were specific and serious: driving under the influence of alcohol and driving with a blood alcohol content over California's legal limit of 0.08%. These dual charges are standard in California DUI cases, allowing prosecutors to pursue conviction on either the impairment theory or the blood alcohol level theory, or both. The initial arraignment was scheduled for October 7th, 2024, giving Addison and his legal team several months to prepare their defense strategy. However, like many aspects of this case, nothing would proceed according to the original timeline. The October arraignment was delayed and rescheduled as the legal proceedings became more complex than initially anticipated. During this period, Addison had to navigate the dual pressures of his legal troubles and his professional responsibilities. On July 24th, 2024, just 12 days after his arrest, he spoke publicly at Vikings training camp for the first time about the incident. His comments were carefully measured but emotionally revealing.
Really, I just make sure I'm put it behind me, because at the end of the day, I got a job to do. You know, my job is to come in here and work, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure I'm still JA. You know, they know my character, they know my heart.
He admitted he was in a dark place during the time of the arrest, but vowed to own up and learn from his mistakes. While he didn't provide specific details about the incident itself, likely on advice from his attorney, his demeanor suggested someone who understood the gravity of what had happened and was genuinely remorseful. The legal case progressed slowly through the California court system. When December 3, 2024 arrived, Addison appeared in Los Angeles County Superior Court and entered a plea of not guilty to both charges. This was a strategic decision that would allow his defense team to examine all the evidence, challenge any procedural issues, and potentially negotiate a more favorable outcome than an immediate guilty plea might have achieved. A pretrial conference was scheduled for January 9, 2025, beginning what would become a series of court appearances and legal maneuvering that extended well into the following year. Each court date seemed to bring new delays and complications, creating ongoing uncertainty for both Addison and the Vikings organization as they tried to plan for the upcoming season. The January pretrial hearing came and went, advancing the case toward what appeared to be an inevitable jury trial. By February 21st, 2025, discussions on social media were highlighting the Vikings' need for wide receiver depth due to the potential suspension hanging over Addison's head. The uncertainty was affecting not just legal planning, but also the team's roster construction and strategic preparation.
Nice to have your case resolved.
Yes.
I'm sure you guys told Andrew that, but are you bracing for a potential suspension, or how are you kind of weighing?
Right. Everything, is out of my control right now. So whatever the league got for me, I'll be prepared with whatever decision they make.
March 12th, 2025 brought another pretrial hearing in Los Angeles, with Addison attending either virtually or through his legal counsel. The repeated delays and procedural hearings suggested that both sides were engaged in serious negotiations behind the scenes, even as they publicly maintained their positions and prepared for trial. An additional pretrial conference occurred on April 10th, 2025, followed by a jury trial setting that was initially scheduled for June 16th, but then delayed again. The constant rescheduling became a pattern that frustrated observers and left everyone wondering when this legal saga would finally reach its conclusion. The jury trial was eventually rescheduled for July 15th, 2025, nearly exactly 1 year after the original arrest. As that date approached, there was significant speculation about whether the case would actually go to trial or if a last-minute plea agreement might be reached. The answer came in dramatic fashion. On July 15th, 2025, the day the trial was set to begin, Addison opted for a plea deal instead of proceeding with the jury trial. This decision represented a significant shift in strategy and suggested that his legal team had negotiated terms they found acceptable.
The trial in Vikings receiver Jordan Addison's DUI case was supposed to start on Tuesday. It didn't. Instead, Addison is due back in court on Thursday. Kevin Seaver at ESPN, who's not Kirk Gershman, posted on Tuesday that online records show Addison is scheduled for a hearing on Thursday.
The case was formally resolved on July 17, 2025, when Addison pleaded no contest to a reduced charge of wet reckless driving. This plea deal represented a significant victory for his defense team, as wet reckless is a much less serious offense than a full DUI conviction, though it still acknowledges alcohol involvement in reckless driving behavior. The wet reckless charge is a common outcome in California DUI cases, particularly for first-time offenders with no prior history of similar violations. It carries lighter penalties than a DUI conviction, while still holding the defendant accountable for their actions. As part of the plea agreement, the original DUI charges were completely dismissed. The sentence Addison received was relatively lenient, reflecting both the reduced nature of the charges and his status as a first-time offender. He was ordered to pay a fine of $390 plus additional court fees, complete 2 online DUI education courses, including a Mothers Against Drunk Driving program, and serve up to 12 months of probation that could potentially be reduced to 6 months with good behavior. Notably absent from his sentence was any jail time, which had been a possibility under the original charges. His attorney noted that he had voluntarily participated in anti-drunk driving events even before the case was resolved, which likely contributed to the favorable outcome. Several factors worked in Addison's favor during the legal proceedings. He was a first-time DUI offender, despite his previous 2023 speeding citation. The incident involved no accident, no injuries to himself or others, and no prior DUI convictions on his record. His cooperation with authorities during the arrest and his voluntary participation in anti-DUI programs demonstrated genuine remorse and commitment to change. California's cite and release policy for misdemeanors also worked in his favor, as it showed the initial arresting officers didn't view the offense as requiring immediate incarceration. This procedural decision early in the case likely influenced how seriously prosecutors viewed the charges throughout the legal process. Addison's attorney, Jacqueline Sparagna, praised his decision to accept responsibility for his actions. The Vikings organization was kept informed throughout the legal proceedings, proceedings, allowing them to prepare for various potential outcomes and their impact on team planning.
What made you decide to do that instead of just kind of go through the court process to do a plea?
Yeah, right. Just to get it all behind me, you know, and just get on with the season.
The resolution of the legal case, however, did not end Addison's troubles. While the criminal courts had reached their conclusion, the NFL operates under its own disciplinary system that functions independently of the legal system. Under the NFL's personal conduct policy, alcohol-related offenses typically result in a 3-game suspension without pay for first-time violators, even if the charges are reduced to something less than a full DUI. Historical precedent suggested that Addison could face anywhere from 1 to 3 games of suspension, but the league conducts its own independent investigations and doesn't automatically follow court outcomes. The NFL has the authority to impose discipline based on conduct that it determines is detrimental to the league, regardless of how criminal courts resolve related charges. As of July 30th, 2025, no NFL suspension had been announced, though league review was ongoing. If the anticipated 3-game suspension were imposed, Addison would miss the season opener against the Bears, followed by games against the Falcons and Bengals, and would forfeit approximately $88,000 per game in salary. The financial implications extended beyond just lost game checks. Addison's rookie contract contained guarantees that could be voided due to conduct-related issues, potentially costing him around $1.5 million in remaining guaranteed money on his 4-year, $13.7 million deal.
Have you apologized to the team?
Since it came out, you know, and people been reaching out to me individually and just asked me, you know, trying to figure out what was going on. And, you know, I just respect them for being hard on me, but picking me up at the same time and, you know, just bringing me in, making sure that I'm moving forward. They know that I'm going to shake it off.
The legal resolution provided some closure to a case that had dragged on for over a year, but it also raised questions about the effectiveness of California's approach to DUI enforcement and whether the relatively lenient outcome adequately addressed the seriousness of the offense. For Addison, the plea deal represented an opportunity to move forward, but the shadow of potential NFL discipline and the damage to his reputation would continue to follow him as he prepared for what could be a defining season in his young career. Jordan Addison's troubled path from college star to NFL controversy. To understand how Jordan Addison found himself passed out behind the wheel of a Rolls-Royce on a Los Angeles freeway, you have to go back to the beginning of his rise to football stardom and the pattern of questionable decisions that preceded that fateful July night. His journey from college football's most promising receiver to the center of one of the NFL's most talked about controversies is a story filled with talent, ambition, and increasingly poor judgment calls that would ultimately threaten everything he had worked to achieve. Jordan Addison was born on January 27, 2002, in Frederick, Maryland, and began his college career at the University of Pittsburgh in 2020. As a freshman, he showed immediate promise, appearing in 10 games and recording 60 receptions for 666 yards and 4 touchdowns. But it was his sophomore season in 2021 that truly announced his arrival as one of college football's elite talents. Working with quarterback Kenny Pickett, who would later be drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, Addison exploded for 100 receptions, 1,593 yards, and 17 touchdowns. His performance earned him the prestigious Biletnikoff Award as the nation's top wide receiver and All-American honors. He appeared destined to become a Pitt legend and a certain high NFL draft pick. But then, everything changed. Following the 2021 season, significant changes began happening at Pittsburgh. Pickett declared for the NFL draft, the offensive coordinator left, and Addison's position coach departed as well. Faced with an uncertain future and a completely different offensive system, Addison began considering his options. On May 3rd, 2022, after much speculation, Addison officially entered the NCAA transfer portal. The decision sent shockwaves through college football, as transfers of this magnitude were still relatively rare at the time. But what happened next would create a controversy that would follow him throughout his college career and into the NFL. On May 19th, 2022, Addison committed to the University of Southern California, joining a program led by new head coach Lincoln Riley. The move reunited him with quarterback Caleb Williams, a fellow Washington, D.C. area native who had also transferred from Oklahoma to follow Riley to Los Angeles. However, the transfer wasn't just about football fit or geographic preferences. Pitt head coach Pat Narduzzi publicly accused USC and Riley of tampering, claiming that USC had illegally contacted or enticed Addison before he entered the transfer portal. Such contact would violate NCAA rules that prohibit communication with enrolled players from other programs without portal entry.
And there's a lot of people that are really fired up about this. Really upset at the idea that a kid might have been tampered with. And I gotta tell you, it does not bother me that much because I don't think that this is the only instance. What surprised me was Pat Narduzzi coming out big time against Lincoln Riley.
Reports indicated that Pitt officials suspected USC of offering Addison a lucrative NIL deal, potentially worth up to $3 million, to lure him to Los Angeles. This was seen as part of a broader pattern in the NIL era, where high-profile transfers were increasingly influenced by financial opportunities, but such offers cannot legally be made until a player enters the portal. The allegations suggested that Addison was already in Los Angeles negotiating deals before formally entering the portal, which would represent a clear violation of NCAA rules. A source within the Pitt program confirmed to media outlets that USC's coaching staff had illegally tampered with Addison. The timeline of events painted a suspicious picture. In late April 2022, rumors surfaced that Addison was considering a transfer, with USC emerging as the front runner. On April 29, 2022, Narduzzi called Riley multiple times to express his displeasure, accusing USC of tampering. Reports indicated that Addison may have been in Los Angeles at this time before he had entered the transfer portal.
Okay. I'm extremely pro transfer whenever you want, okay?
When Addison finally addressed the allegations publicly in August 2022, he dismissed the tampering accusations as just some BS, insisting the truth always going to come to light. He emphasized that his transfer was a business decision focused on professional development and football, not NIL deals. Despite the serious allegations, no formal NCAA investigation was launched, and no penalties were issued against USC, Riley, or Addison. The NCAA's enforcement in tampering cases had been criticized as lax during the early NIL portal era, with many similar accusations going unpunished. The controversy established an early pattern that would follow Addison throughout his career. Talented player makes questionable decisions, faces public criticism, denies wrongdoing, and ultimately faces minimal consequences. It was a template that would be repeated with increasingly serious stakes. At USC, Addison performed well, but not spectacularly. In his 2022 season with the Trojans, he recorded 59 receptions for 875 yards and 8 touchdowns, helping USC to an 11-3 record. The numbers were solid, but represented a step back from his record-breaking season at Pitt, leading some to question whether the transfer had been worth the controversy. He declared for the 2023 NFL Draft and was selected 23rd overall by the Minnesota Vikings in the first round. The Vikings saw him as the perfect complement to superstar receiver Justin Jefferson, and initially, everything seemed to be falling into place for the young receiver. But the pattern of poor decision-making that had emerged in college would continue into his professional career. On July 20th, 2023, just months after being drafted, Addison was pulled over by Minnesota State Patrol for driving 140 miles per hour in a 55 miles per hour zone on Interstate 94 in St. Paul at around 3 a.m. Addison claimed the high speed was due to an emergency involving his dog, though this explanation was met with skepticism from authorities and the public. The excuse seemed particularly weak, given that he was traveling at nearly 3 times the speed limit on a major interstate highway in the middle of the night. He later pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor speeding charge, with the reckless driving count dismissed, and was fined $686 while losing his driver's license for 6 months. The NFL did not suspend him, viewing it as a non-alcohol related offense, but Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell expressed disappointment. This incident should have served as a wake-up call for Addison about the consequences of reckless behavior behind the wheel. Instead, it seemed to reinforce his belief that he could engage in dangerous driving behavior with minimal consequences. The stage was set for an even more serious incident. During the 2023 season, Addison performed well on the field, recording 70 receptions for 911 yards and 10 touchdowns in his rookie campaign. He appeared to be justifying the Vikings' faith in him as a first-round pick and seemed to be maturing as both a player and a person. However, signs of continued instability emerged during the 2024 season. In October 2024, Addison posted an Instagram story with a photo of himself captioned "Free 3," referring to his jersey number, sparking rumors that he was unhappy with his role and seeking a trade. This came after a loss to the Los Angeles Rams, fueling speculation about team discord. Addison later clarified that it was not a trade request but a personal expression, possibly tied to his ongoing emotional struggles from the DUI incident. The post was quickly deleted, but it demonstrated the kind of impulsive social media behavior that had become characteristic of his off-field persona. The pattern was clear. Talented player player achieves success, makes poor personal decisions, faces criticism, offers questionable explanations, receives minimal punishment, and then repeats the cycle with increasingly serious consequences. Each incident seemed to reinforce Addison's belief that his talent would ultimately protect him from facing serious repercussions for his actions. Addison's controversies reveal a pattern of driving-related lapses, raising questions about maturity and risk-taking among young NFL stars with sudden wealth. The image of a 22-year-old owning and driving a Rolls-Royce while making million-dollar mistakes became symbolic of broader concerns about how young athletes handle sudden fame and fortune. Comparisons to other players like Rashee Rice, who was involved in a high-speed crash, and Jameson Williams, who was suspended for performance-enhancing drugs, highlighted inconsistencies in how the public judges different types of player misconduct. Some argued that Addison was being unfairly singled out, while others contended that his repeated driving incidents showed a dangerous pattern that needed to be addressed. The Vikings organization has remained publicly supportive of Addison, but reports suggest that another significant incident could lead to his release. Team officials have emphasized accountability and personal growth, but their patience is not unlimited.
A lot of people that's reading it don't really know who I am from the incident, so they just judge me off the incidents that happen. They're not around me every day. You know what I'm saying? They don't know what I do for people outside of football. But, that's all it is. It'd be tough. So I'm just trying to make sure I keep going.
The progression from college tampering allegations to reckless speeding to drunk driving represents an escalating pattern of behavior that suggests deeper issues with judgment and impulse control. Each incident individually might be dismissed as a youthful mistake, but together they paint the picture of someone who consistently makes poor decisions when faced with stress, pressure, or emotional difficulties. As of July 31st, 2025, Addison is focused on the upcoming season, but the potential NFL suspension looms as a test of his resilience and the league's enforcement of conduct policies. His career has reached a crossroads where talent alone may not be enough to overcome the reputation he has built through a series of increasingly serious off-field incidents. The question now is whether Jordan Addison can break the pattern that has defined his young career, or if the next incident will be the one that finally brings consequences serious enough to derail the promising future that his athletic ability has made possible. For a player who has consistently shown he can make spectacular catches on the field, the challenge now is proving he can make better decisions off it.